The Arctic Ocean transforms into a tempestuous battlefield on the night before Christmas, 1943. Towering waves crash against the hull of the Kriegsmarine's most formidable vessel, the Scharnhorst, a warship that has earned its reputation as one of the fastest predators ever to sail the northern seas. The ship cuts through the darkness like a phantom, its steel frame groaning under the relentless assault of wind and ice-laden spray. Admiral Marcus Whitmore stands rigid at the command bridge, his weathered face illuminated by the pale glow of instrument panels. His eyes are fixed on the horizon, searching for the merchant convoy that intelligence reports have placed somewhere in these treacherous waters. The convoy represents vulnerability, a collection of transport vessels laden with supplies destined for Soviet ports, vessels that cannot match the speed or firepower of his command. Whitmore's jaw tightens as he contemplates the mission ahead. He has spent decades in naval warfare, and he understands the calculus of predation at sea. The merchant ships are slow, defenseless, and isolated. His battleship is fast, powerful, and equipped with weapons that can obliterate entire vessels with a single salvo. The tactical advantage seems overwhelming, almost inevitable. But the Arctic has a way of humbling even the most confident commanders. The storm intensifies, and visibility drops to mere hundreds of yards. Whitmore orders his crew to maintain their course, to push deeper into the darkness where the convoy awaits. The engines rumble with tremendous power, driving the massive warship forward through waters that have claimed countless vessels throughout history. Then, without warning, the night sky erupts into brilliant white light. Star shells burst overhead, transforming the darkness into an artificial daylight that reveals everything below. Whitmore's expression shifts from confidence to shock. The merchant convoy is not alone. British naval forces have positioned themselves between his ship and the prey. The trap has been sprung, and Whitmore realizes with crystalline clarity that he has sailed directly into an ambush. His mind races through the tactical implications. The British cruisers are closing in, their gun crews preparing to unleash devastating firepower. Whitmore understands that his only advantage is speed, and he must exploit it immediately or face annihilation. The Admiral's voice cuts through the chaos with absolute authority. He orders the helm to execute a hard turn, a maneuver that will swing the massive warship around by 150 degrees. The ship's structure groans in protest as it responds to the command, its momentum fighting against the violent change in direction. But Whitmore is not retreating entirely. Even as the Scharnhorst turns away from the approaching British guns, he orders his aft turret, the massive Caesar installation, to rotate and engage the enemy. The turret swings around with mechanical precision, its enormous barrels elevating toward the British positions. The gun crews work with practiced efficiency, loading shells that weigh as much as automobiles into the breach. The order to fire echoes through the ship, and the turret erupts in a display of raw destructive power. The recoil from the massive guns sends shockwaves through the entire vessel. Whitmore watches as his shells streak toward the British ships, trailing fire across the night sky. Some find their marks, creating explosions that light up the darkness. But the British response is immediate and devastating. Their shells come screaming back, and the Scharnhorst shudders as impacts rock the hull. One shell tears through the ship's radar installation, destroying the electronic eyes that allow the crew to see through the storm and darkness. A young officer screams the damage report, his voice cracking with the weight of the news. Whitmore's expression hardens. Without radar, his ship is sailing blind, dependent entirely on visual observation and the reports of lookouts straining to see through the driving snow and spray. The radar is destroyed, and Whitmore must make an impossible decision: continue forward into unknown danger or retreat and risk being caught by the pursuing British forces. What will he choose? Whitmore's mind works through the problem with the precision of a chess master, contemplating a board where the pieces are invisible. The loss of radar transforms the tactical situation from advantageous to precarious. His ship is faster than the British cruisers pursuing him, but speed alone cannot guarantee escape if he cannot see the obstacles ahead or the enemy positions around him. The admiral stands motionless, his hands gripping the edge of the navigation table, his knuckles white with tension. Around him, the bridge crew maintains their stations, waiting for orders that will determine whether they live or perish in these frozen waters. The Scharnhorst accelerates to maximum velocity, its engines producing a thunderous roar that reverberates through every compartment. The ship's bow rises and falls with the rhythm of the massive waves, spray cascading across the deck in sheets of ice-cold water. Whitmore orders the crew to generate smoke, a defensive measure that will obscure the ship's position and make it more difficult for the British gunners to maintain accurate fire. The smoke generators spring to life, belching thick clouds that mix with the snow and fog, creating a visual barrier between the Scharnhorst and her pursuers. The British shells continue to fall, but without the radar to guide them, their accuracy diminishes. Some shells splash harmlessly into the sea, their explosions sending geysers of water hundreds of feet into the air. Others strike the ship, but the smoke and darkness reduce the damage. Whitmore receives reports from throughout the vessel. The damage is significant but not catastrophic. The ship's structure remains intact and the engines continue to produce maximum power. The admiral makes a decision that will haunt him for the remainder of his life. He orders the Scharnhorst to turn toward the south, toward the port where the ship can seek refuge and repairs. He believes that his speed advantage will allow him to outrun the British pursuit, that the darkness and distance will eventually provide safety. The order is transmitted through the ship's communication system and the helm responds, bringing the massive warship around on a new heading. But Whitmore does not understand the full scope of the British strategy. The cruisers pursuing him are not acting independently. They are part of a coordinated operation, a carefully orchestrated trap that extends far beyond the immediate engagement. As the Scharnhorst races southward, the British cruiser captains maintain their pursuit, but they are also transmitting vital information to other forces positioned elsewhere in the Arctic. The radio operators aboard the British ships send out a transmission that will seal the fate of the Scharnhorst and everyone aboard her. They report the German warship's position, course, and speed with precise accuracy. The message travels through the darkness, reaching the ears of Admiral Sir William Ashford, the Commander-in-Chief of the British Home Fleet, who has positioned himself aboard the HMS Duke of York, a battleship that dwarfs even the Scharnhorst in terms of firepower. Ashford receives the transmission and allows himself a thin smile. The trap is working exactly as planned. The German admiral has taken the bait, has committed his ship to a course that will bring him directly into the path of the British main battle force. Ashford has been waiting for this moment, has positioned his ships with meticulous care, and has calculated the angles and distances with mathematical precision. The British Commander-in-Chief is not a man given to emotional displays, but there is a grim satisfaction in knowing that the operation is proceeding according to plan. He orders his crew to prepare for battle, to ensure that every gun is loaded, every system is functioning, and every man is ready for the engagement that is about to unfold. The radar operators aboard the Duke of York maintain constant vigilance, their eyes fixed on the green screens that display the positions of all vessels in the area. They watch as the Scharnhorst approaches, moving at high speed through the darkness, completely unaware that it is sailing toward its doom. The distance between the two battleships decreases with each passing minute. Ashford orders his crew to maintain their current position, to hold steady and wait for the German ship to come within effective firing range. The patience required for this moment is extraordinary. The British sailors stand at their stations, their hands steady, despite the knowledge that they are about to engage in one of the most significant naval battles of the war. Whitmore believes he is escaping, but he has no idea that a far more powerful British battleship is waiting directly in his path. The trap is about to be sprung, and the Scharnhorst is sailing directly toward her destruction. What will happen when the two battleships finally meet? What would you have done in Whitmore's position? Comment below with your tactical analysis. Should he have continued the pursuit or retreated immediately when the radar was destroyed? Let's discuss the strategic decisions that shape this battle. The Arctic night deepens as the Scharnhorst continues her southward journey, her crew believing that each passing minute brings them closer to safety and the relative security of port. Whitmore stands at the bridge, his expression grim but resolute. He has commanded warships for most of his adult life, and he understands the weight of responsibility that comes with such authority. Every decision he makes affects the lives of nearly 2,000 men who depend on his judgment and tactical acumen. The Admiral reviews the damage reports that continue to arrive from various sections of the ship. The radar installation is destroyed beyond immediate repair, but the ship's structural integrity remains sound. The engines are performing at maximum capacity, and the crew is responding to orders with the discipline and professionalism that comes from years of training and experience. Below decks, the engineering crews work in conditions of extreme heat and noise. The boilers roar as they convert fuel into steam, driving the massive turbines that propel the Scharnhorst through the water at speeds that few other vessels can match. The engineers understand that their work is critical to the ship's survival. If the engines fail, if the power drops even slightly, the pursuing British cruisers will close the distance and bring the Scharnhorst within effective firing range. The men work with focused intensity, monitoring gauges and adjusting controls, their faces glistening with sweat despite the cold that permeates the ship. They are the unseen heroes of this battle, the men whose labor keeps the warship moving forward through the darkness. Meanwhile, aboard the HMS Duke of York, Admiral Ashford watches the radar screen with the intensity of a predator tracking its prey. The green blip that represents the Scharnhorst moves steadily across the display, its position and course confirming that the German ship is indeed heading directly toward the British battle force. Ashford's tactical officers work quickly, calculating firing solutions and preparing the ship's massive gun turrets for the engagement that is about to unfold. The Duke of York is equipped with 10 14-inch main guns, weapons of such tremendous power that a single salvo can devastate even the most heavily armored warship. Ashford has commanded this vessel for months, and he knows her capabilities intimately. He understands the range at which her guns are most effective, the time required for shells to travel from the gun barrels to the target, and the probability of achieving hits under various weather and visibility conditions. The British Admiral orders his crew to maintain their current heading and speed, to position the Duke of York so that when the Scharnhorst finally appears on the horizon, the British battleship will be in the optimal position to deliver a devastating broadside. The crew responds with mechanical precision, adjusting the ship's course by minute increments, ensuring that every element of the battle plan is executed flawlessly. Ashford knows that naval engagements at this scale are determined by factors that extend far beyond the courage or determination of individual sailors. The outcome will be decided by superior positioning, better intelligence, more accurate gunnery, and the willingness to exploit every advantage that circumstances provide. The radar operators continue to track the Scharnhorst's approach. The distance between the two battleships decreases steadily. 35,000 yards, 30,000 yards, 25,000 yards. Each reduction in distance brings the moment of engagement closer. Ashford stands at the bridge, his hands clasped behind his back, his expression revealing nothing of the intensity of his focus. He has studied the Scharnhorst's characteristics, understands her strengths and weaknesses, and has developed a tactical plan that he believes will result in a decisive British victory. But naval warfare is inherently unpredictable. Shells do not always travel where calculations suggest they should. Ships do not always respond to helm orders with the precision that theory predicts. The human element, the courage and determination of individual sailors, can sometimes overcome even the most carefully laid plans. The British gun crews stand ready at their stations, their hands resting on the loading mechanisms, their eyes fixed on the officers who will give the command to fire. The tension aboard the Duke of York is palpable, a physical force that seems to press down on every man in the ship. They know that within minutes they will be engaged in combat with one of the most formidable warships in the German Navy. They know that shells weighing thousands of pounds will be traveling through the air at tremendous velocity, seeking to penetrate their ship's armor and kill them where they stand. But they are British sailors, trained and disciplined, and they will perform their duties with the professionalism that their service demands. The Scharnhorst continues to approach the Duke of York, completely unaware of the danger that awaits. Whitmore believes he is escaping, but he is actually sailing directly into the most powerful naval ambush of the entire Arctic campaign. The moment of collision is approaching, and nothing can stop what is about to happen. The radar operators aboard the Duke of York continue their relentless tracking of the approaching German warship. The distance has closed to 20,000 yards, then 15,000 yards. Ashford maintains his composure, his voice steady as he issues orders that will determine the fate of both ships and the thousands of men aboard them. The British admiral understands that the moment of engagement is imminent, and he wants his crew to be absolutely prepared for what is about to unfold. He orders the gun crews to stand ready, to ensure that every weapon is loaded and aimed, that every system is functioning at peak efficiency. The men respond with the discipline that comes from months of training and the knowledge that their lives depend on the precision of their execution. Whitmore, aboard the Scharnhorst, remains unaware of the danger that approaches from the darkness ahead. The German admiral continues to believe that his ship is escaping, that the speed advantage will carry him to safety. He stands at the bridge, reviewing charts and damage reports, his mind focused on the logistics of reaching port and conducting repairs. The crew of the Scharnhorst maintains their vigilance, but without radar, they are dependent entirely on visual observation and the reports of lookouts straining to see through the snow and darkness. The storm continues to rage, the wind howling across the deck with a force that makes it difficult for men to maintain their footing. The temperature has dropped far below freezing, and ice accumulates on every exposed surface of the ship. Then suddenly, the night sky erupts into brilliant white light once again. Star shells burst overhead, illuminating the Scharnhorst and revealing her position to every British vessel in the area. But this time, the source of the illumination is not the cruisers that have been pursuing the German warship. This time, the star shells come from the Duke of York, the massive British battleship that has been waiting in the darkness for precisely this moment. Whitmore's expression transforms from confidence to shock as he realizes the full scope of the trap that has been sprung. The British have not simply pursued his ship, they have positioned a far more powerful vessel directly in his path, and now that vessel is preparing to unleash its full destructive capability. Ashford's voice rings out across the bridge of the Duke of York with absolute authority. He orders his gun crews to open fire, to unleash the full power of the British battleship's main armament. The order is transmitted through the ship's communication system, and the gun crews respond with practiced efficiency. The massive turrets begin to rotate, their enormous barrels elevating toward the Scharnhorst. The gun captains make final adjustments to the firing solutions, ensuring that the shells will travel along the precise trajectory required to strike the German warship. The tension aboard the Duke of York reaches a crescendo as the moment of firing approaches. The first salvo erupts from the Duke of York's main guns with a force that shakes the entire ship. 10 14-inch shells are launched simultaneously, their combined weight exceeding 100 tons. The recoil from the guns is so tremendous that the entire battleship shudders, and men who are not braced for the impact are thrown to the deck. The shells travel through the night sky in a graceful arc, their trajectory carrying them across the distance that separates the two battleships. For 30 eternal seconds, the shells are in flight, traveling at velocities that exceed the speed of sound, carrying with them the destructive power of thousands of pounds of high explosives. Aboard the Scharnhorst, the crew sees the muzzle flashes from the British guns and understands immediately that they are under attack from a far more powerful opponent than the cruisers that have been pursuing them. Whitmore's mind races through the tactical implications. The British battleship is more heavily armed than his own vessel, and the engagement has begun at a range where the British guns have a significant advantage. The German admiral realizes with crystalline clarity that his assumption about escaping has been catastrophically wrong. He has not been fleeing from danger, he has been sailing directly toward it. The first salvo from the Duke of York strikes the Scharnhorst with devastating effect. One shell punches directly through the armor of the Anton turret, the foremost of the German battleship's main gun installations. The impact is catastrophic. The shell detonates inside the turret, killing everyone within. The explosion is so violent that it destroys the turret's internal structure, rendering it completely inoperable. Whitmore receives the damage report and understands that his ship has just lost a significant portion of its offensive capability. The German admiral orders the second forward turret, Bruno, to be flooded to prevent the magazines from exploding and spreading the destruction throughout the ship. The order is executed and the turret is sealed, its crew evacuated to safety. The Scharnhorst has been struck by the Duke of York's opening salvo, and the German battleship has already lost one of her main gun turrets. Whitmore is now trapped between the pursuing British cruisers behind him and the more powerful Duke of York ahead. What options remain for the German commander, and can he possibly escape from this seemingly impossible situation? If you appreciate the historical accuracy and tactical detail in this battle narrative, please hit the like button. Your support helps us continue bringing these untold war stories to your screen. Let's reach our goal together. Whitmore's mind works with desperate intensity as he processes the catastrophic turn of events. The Scharnhorst is now engaged with a British battleship that is superior in firepower, and the German warship is trapped between two British forces. The cruisers continue to pursue from behind, while the Duke of York pours devastating fire from ahead. The German admiral realizes that his only option is to attempt to break through the British forces and escape to the east, where the darkness and distance might provide some measure of safety. He orders the helm to execute a hard turn to port, bringing the Scharnhorst around to face the Duke of York directly. The maneuver is dangerous, exposing the German warship's flank to British fire, but Whitmore understands that maintaining his current course will result in certain destruction. The Scharnhorst returns fire with all the weapons that remain operational. The Caesar turret, the aft installation that fired the opening shots of the battle, swings around to engage the Duke of York. The German gun crews work with frantic intensity, loading shells and adjusting the firing solutions as the range between the two battleships continues to change. The shells from the Scharnhorst streak toward the British battleship, and some find their marks, creating explosions that light up the darkness. But the British return fire is far more accurate and far more devastating. Another 14-inch shell from the Duke of York strikes the Scharnhorst's superstructure, triggering a massive fire that spreads rapidly through the upper decks. The flames consume everything in their path, and the German crew fights desperately to contain the conflagration. Men work with hoses and fire extinguishers, their faces blackened by smoke, their bodies drenched in seawater and sweat. The heat from the fire is so intense that it becomes difficult to breathe, and some men collapse from smoke inhalation. But the crew of the Scharnhorst continues to fight, understanding that if the fire reaches the ammunition magazines, the entire ship will be consumed in a catastrophic explosion. The damage control teams work with the desperation of men who understand that their lives depend on their ability to contain the destruction. Whitmore receives reports from throughout the ship, and each report brings worse news. The Bruno turret, which was flooded to prevent an explosion, is now being drained so that it can return to operational status. The German engineers work with incredible speed, pumping water from the turret's compartments and preparing the gun crews to resume firing. The turret comes back to life, and its guns immediately begin engaging the British battleship, but the respite is brief. Another 14-inch shell from the Duke of York strikes the Bruno turret directly, and the impact is catastrophic. The turret is rocked by the explosion, and smoke pours from its interior. The gun crews are forced to evacuate, and the turret falls silent once again. The Scharnhorst continues to accelerate, pushing her engines to absolute maximum power. The ship's structure groans under the strain, and the crew fears that the engines might fail under the tremendous stress. But the engineers below decks continue to feed fuel to the boilers, continue to monitor the gauges and adjust the controls, understanding that the ship's survival depends on maintaining maximum velocity. The British shells continue to fall around the Scharnhorst, some striking the hull, others splashing harmlessly into the sea. The German warship is taking damage with each passing moment, but she continues to move forward, continues to fight. Back aboard the Duke of York, Admiral Ashford watches as the Scharnhorst attempts to escape. The British battleship's guns continue to fire, but the German warship is moving at tremendous speed, and the range between the two vessels is increasing. Ashford realizes with growing concern that the Scharnhorst might actually escape, that the German warship might break through the British forces and disappear into the darkness. The British admiral orders his gun crews to adjust their aim, to compensate for the changing range and the movement of the target. But without accurate radar guidance, the adjustments are based on visual observation and calculations that are subject to error. Then, disaster strikes. A salvo from the Scharnhorst finds its mark, and a 14-inch shell strikes the Duke of York's radar installation. The impact is devastating. The radar system, which has been guiding the British gunnery with such precision, is destroyed. The radar operators scream the damage report, their voices cracking with the realization that the ship has just lost its most critical advantage. Ashford's expression hardens. Without radar, the Duke of York will be unable to adjust its fire with the same accuracy. The British battleship will be forced to rely on visual observation and the calculations of its gunnery officers, methods that are far less reliable than electronic guidance. But Ashford is not a man who accepts defeat easily. He orders his crew to make repairs immediately, to restore the radar system to operational status as quickly as possible. The radar technicians spring into action, working with desperate speed to identify the damage and implement repairs. But the damage is extensive, and the repairs will take time that the British battleship does not have. The Scharnhorst continues to pull away, and with each passing second, the distance between the two battleships increases. Then a young officer named Lieutenant James Callwell, who serves as the radar technician aboard the Duke of York, makes a decision that will change the course of the battle. Caldwell is only 24 years old, a man who has spent his entire naval career working with electronic equipment, understanding the intricacies of radar systems and the critical importance of accurate targeting information. He looks at the damaged radar antenna, realizes that the problem is not with the internal electronics, but with the physical alignment of the antenna itself. The antenna has been knocked out of position by the impact of the shell, and if it can be realigned, the radar system might be restored to operational status. Caldwell does not wait for orders. He does not inform his superiors of his intentions. Instead, he climbs out of the radar shack and begins to make his way toward the mast where the antenna is mounted. The storm is raging with tremendous fury, and the wind buffets him with a force that threatens to tear him from the ship. The snow and ice sting his face, and the cold is so intense that it seems to penetrate his very bones. But Caldwell continues to climb step by step, his hands gripping the metal framework of the mast, his feet finding purchase on the narrow rungs of the ladder. The main guns of the Duke of York continue to fire, and the recoil from each salvo sends shockwaves through the entire ship. Caldwell is buffeted by the blast from the guns, and he fears that he will be knocked from the mast and plunge into the sea below. But he continues to climb, driven by the knowledge that the radar system is critical to the British effort to stop the Scharnhorst. The wind tears his hat from his head, and it disappears into the darkness. Caldwell's hair whips around his face, and his eyes water from the cold and the wind. But he continues upward, his determination overcoming the physical agony of the climb. Finally, after what seems like an eternity, Caldwell reaches the antenna. His hands are numb from the cold, and his fingers can barely feel the metal framework. But he manages to grasp the antenna and begin to push it back into alignment. The effort required is tremendous, and for a moment, Caldwell fears that he will not have the strength to complete the task, but he summons every ounce of his remaining strength and pushes the antenna back into its proper position. The effort is so great that he nearly loses his grip on the mast, and for a terrifying moment he hangs suspended above the sea, held only by his fingertips. But Caldwell manages to regain his grip and pull himself back against the mast. He remains there for a moment, breathing heavily, his entire body shaking from the cold and the exertion. Then, slowly, he begins to make his way back down the mast, his descent as perilous as his ascent. The wind continues to rage, and the ship continues to pitch and roll with the motion of the waves, but Caldwell continues downward step by step until finally he reaches the deck and makes his way back to the radar shack. Caldwell has risked his life to realign the radar antenna, but will the system actually come back online? And even if it does, will the radar be restored in time to help the Duke of York stop the Scharnhorst from escaping into the darkness? The fate of the entire battle may depend on whether Caldwell's heroic effort succeeds or fails. The radar screen in the Duke of York's Combat Information Center flickers to life, and the operators gasp as the green display returns to operational status. The antenna has been successfully realigned, and the radar system is once again providing accurate targeting information. The news spreads rapidly through the ship, and a sense of renewed hope fills the hearts of the British sailors. Ashford receives the report and allows himself a thin smile. The young radar technician has given the British battleship a second chance, and Ashford is determined to exploit that opportunity to the fullest extent. The British admiral orders his gun crews to adjust their aim based on the newly restored radar information. The firing solutions are recalculated with precision, and the Duke of York's main guns are brought to bear on the Scharnhorst with renewed accuracy. The British battleship opens fire once again, and this time the shells are guided by the restored radar system. The accuracy is immediately apparent. A 14-inch shell strikes the Scharnhorst and passes through the thin upper belt armor, penetrating deep into the German warship's interior. The shell detonates in boiler room number 1, and the explosion is catastrophic. Whitmore receives the damage report, and his face goes pale. The Scharnhorst has been struck in a critical location, and the damage is severe. The boiler room is flooded, and the ship's steam production has dropped dramatically. The Scharnhorst's speed, which has been her greatest advantage throughout the battle, begins to decrease. The warship that was traveling at 28 knots is now slowing to 8 knots, then 10 knots. The reduction in speed is catastrophic because it makes the Scharnhorst vulnerable to attacks that she could previously outrun. Whitmore understands with absolute clarity that the battle is lost. The Scharnhorst can no longer escape, and she is now trapped in a position where she will be subjected to overwhelming firepower from multiple British vessels. The German admiral makes a decision that will define his legacy. He orders a transmission to be sent to German naval headquarters. The message reads, "We will fight to the last shell. Long live Germany." The transmission is sent, and Whitmore turns his attention to the immediate tactical situation. The German engineers work with desperate intensity to restore power to the ship's engines. They manage to bring the boiler room back into partial operation, and the Scharnhorst's speed increases to 22 knots. But even at this speed, the German warship is no longer fast enough to escape the British forces that are closing in from all directions. The British cruisers that have been pursuing from behind are now joined by the Duke of York, and additional British destroyers are approaching from the north. The Scharnhorst is surrounded, trapped in a position where escape is impossible. Whitmore orders his gun crews to focus their fire on the approaching destroyers, understanding that these smaller vessels represent the most immediate threat. The secondary turrets of the Scharnhorst, equipped with 15-centimeter guns, begin to engage the British destroyers. The German gunners work with frantic intensity, loading shells and adjusting the firing solutions as the range between the ships continues to change. Some of the German shells find their marks, and one destroyer is struck by a direct hit that causes significant damage. But the British destroyers continue their approach, undeterred by the German fire. The first pair of British destroyers launches their attack. 8 torpedoes streak through the water toward the Scharnhorst, their wakes visible in the darkness as they approach the German warship. Whitmore orders evasive maneuvers, but the Scharnhorst is too large and too slow to avoid all of the incoming weapons. One torpedo finds its mark, striking the German warship's hull with a tremendous explosion. The impact rocks the entire ship, and water begins to pour into the damaged compartments. The Scharnhorst shudders and groans, and her speed begins to decrease once again. But the attack is not over. 2 more British destroyers make their run, launching a total of 12 torpedoes toward the Scharnhorst. The German warship's anti-torpedo defenses are overwhelmed by the sheer number of incoming weapons. 1 torpedo strikes the port side of the ship, and 3 more strike the starboard side in rapid succession. The explosions are tremendous, and the Scharnhorst begins to take on water at an alarming rate. The ship's list increases as water floods into the damaged compartments, and the crew struggles to maintain their footing on the increasingly tilted deck. Whitmore orders the Scharnhorst to turn around and attempt a torpedo attack of her own, a desperate measure designed to inflict damage on the British forces that are overwhelming his ship. The German warship's torpedo tubes are brought to bear on the approaching British destroyers, and a single torpedo is launched. But the torpedo misses its intended target, disappearing into the darkness without finding a mark. The Scharnhorst's attempt at retaliation has failed, and the German warship is now completely at the mercy of the British forces that surround her. The British destroyers continue their assault, making repeated runs and launching additional torpedoes. The Scharnhorst's hull is struck again and again, and the damage accumulates with each impact. The German warship begins to list more severely, and the crew realizes that the ship is sinking. The Caesar turret, which fired the opening shots of the battle and has continued to engage the enemy throughout the engagement, is struck by a 14-inch shell from the Duke of York. The impact is devastating, and the turret is damaged beyond repair. The gun crews are forced to evacuate, and the turret falls silent for the final time. The Scharnhorst continues to sink, her bow beginning to dip beneath the surface of the water. The crew fights desperately to keep the ship afloat, but the damage is too extensive, and the water is rising faster than the pumps can remove it. The ship's list increases to a dangerous angle, and men who are not braced for the motion are thrown across the deck. The secondary turrets continue to fire, even as the ship is dying around them. The German sailors understand that their ship is lost, but they continue to fight, continue to engage the enemy, right up until the moment when the ship finally succumbs to the damage and begins her final descent into the Arctic depths. The Scharnhorst is sinking, her hull breached in multiple locations, her engines failing, her guns falling silent one by one. But what of Admiral Whitmore? What of the crew? Will anyone survive the sinking of this mighty warship, or will the Arctic Ocean claim all of them as it has claimed so many others throughout history? If you want to see more untold stories from the depths of naval history, subscribe to our channel now. We bring you the real accounts of courage, sacrifice, and tactical brilliance that shaped the outcome of World War II. Join our community of history enthusiasts today. The Scharnhorst's final moments are a study in the terrible beauty of naval warfare. The mighty warship, which has terrorized British convoys and evaded capture for months, is now reduced to a dying vessel, her hull breached in multiple locations, her superstructure engulfed in flames, her crew fighting a losing battle against the inexorable forces of physics and destruction. Admiral Whitmore stands on the bridge, his hands gripping the railing, his eyes fixed on the horizon that he will never reach. The German admiral understands with absolute clarity that his ship is lost, that nothing he can do will prevent the inevitable sinking that is about to occur. But he remains at his post, as tradition demands, as honor requires, as the code of naval command dictates. The water continues to rise, flooding compartment after compartment, overwhelming the pumps that attempt to remove it. The Scharnhorst's list increases to a catastrophic angle, and the ship begins to roll. The crew members who are still alive scramble to reach the upper decks, understanding that remaining below will mean certain death. Men climb ladders and scramble through passageways, their movements frantic and desperate. Some reach the deck and begin to prepare the lifeboats, though they understand that in these conditions the lifeboats offer little more than a temporary reprieve from the cold and the darkness. The British ships continue to pour fire into the dying German warship, even as she is sinking. The Duke of York's guns continue to fire, and the shells continue to strike the Scharnhorst, adding to the destruction that is already consuming the ship. The British destroyers continue their attacks, launching additional torpedoes that strike the German warship's hull. The British cruisers maintain their positions, their guns ready to engage any German vessel that might attempt to escape. The British forces are determined to ensure that the Scharnhorst does not somehow manage to escape, that the German warship will be completely destroyed. The Scharnhorst's bow begins to sink beneath the surface of the water, and the stern rises into the air at an increasingly steep angle. The propellers, which have driven the ship through countless miles of ocean, continue to turn slowly, their rotation becoming increasingly sluggish as the ship's power systems fail. The crew members who are still aboard the ship cling to whatever they can grasp, their bodies pressed against the tilted deck, their faces contorted with fear and desperation. Some men jump into the water, preferring the cold embrace of the Arctic Ocean to the certainty of being trapped aboard a sinking ship. Whitmore remains on the bridge until the very end, his body pressed against the railing as the ship tilts beneath him. The German admiral understands that he will not survive this battle, that his command has ended in catastrophic failure. But he also understands that he has done everything within his power to defend his ship and his crew, that he has fought with courage and determination against overwhelming odds. In his final moments, Whitmore thinks of his family, of the life he has lived, of the choices that have brought him to this moment. Then, as the bridge tilts to an impossible angle, Whitmore loses his grip on the railing and falls into the darkness. The Scharnhorst continues her final descent. The bow sinks deeper, and the stern rises higher until the ship is nearly vertical in the water. The massive hull, which has been the pride of the Kriegsmarine, is now nothing more than a dying monument to the futility of war. The ship's structure groans and creaks as the pressure of the water increases, as the hull begins to collapse under the weight of the ocean. Then, with a final, terrible sound that echoes across the water, the Scharnhorst breaks apart. The massive warship, which has been one of the most formidable vessels in the German Navy, is reduced to wreckage, sinking into the depths of the Arctic Ocean. The water is filled with debris and survivors, men clinging to pieces of wood and metal, their bodies already beginning to succumb to the cold. The British ships move through the water, their crews searching for survivors, their boats being lowered to rescue the German sailors who have managed to survive the sinking. The rescue operation is difficult and dangerous, conducted in the darkness and the cold, with the storm continuing to rage around the British vessels. The British sailors work with determination and compassion, understanding that despite the fact that they have just been engaged in mortal combat with these men, they are still human beings who deserve to be saved if possible. Admiral Ashford stands on the bridge of the Duke of York and watches as the Scharnhorst disappears beneath the surface of the water. The British admiral's expression is somber, his face reflecting the weight of the victory that has just been achieved. Ashford understands that the destruction of the Scharnhorst is a significant achievement, a blow against the German Navy that will have strategic implications for the remainder of the war. But he also understands the human cost of this victory, the lives that have been lost, the families that will receive telegrams informing them of the deaths of their loved ones. Ashford turns to his officers and speaks words that will be remembered by those who hear them. "Gentlemen," he says, his voice steady and measured, "the battle against the Scharnhorst has ended in victory for us. I hope that any of you who are ever called upon to lead a ship into action against an opponent many times superior will command your ship as gallantly as the Scharnhorst was commanded today." The British admiral's words are a tribute to the courage and determination of the German sailors, an acknowledgement of the fact that despite being on opposite sides of a terrible war, they have all demonstrated the qualities that define true naval officers. The rescue operation continues throughout the night. The British ships search the water for survivors, pulling men from the cold depths of the Arctic Ocean. But the cold is relentless, and many of the German sailors do not survive long enough to be rescued. Of the nearly 2,000 men who were aboard the Scharnhorst when the battle began, only 36 are pulled alive from the water. Admiral Marcus Whitmore is not among them. The German fleet commander, who stood on the bridge of his ship until the very end, has gone down with the Scharnhorst, his body lost to the depths of the Arctic Ocean. The battle is over. The Scharnhorst, one of the most formidable warships in the German Navy, has been destroyed. The British have achieved a significant victory, but the cost has been measured in human lives, in the suffering of men who have been subjected to the terrible realities of naval warfare. The Arctic Ocean, which has claimed countless vessels throughout history, has claimed another, adding the Scharnhorst to the long list of ships that have been lost in these treacherous waters. The story of the Scharnhorst's final battle is a testament to the courage and determination of the men who served aboard her, both German and British. It is a story of tactical brilliance and desperate struggle, of men facing overwhelming odds and fighting with every ounce of strength and determination that they possess. It is a story that reminds us of the terrible cost of war, of the lives that are lost, of the families that are torn apart by the violence and destruction that war brings. The legacy of the Scharnhorst lives on in the memories of those who survived the battle, in the historical records that document the engagement, and in the hearts of those who understand the significance of this naval encounter. The ship may be gone, resting on the bottom of the Arctic Ocean, but the story of her final battle will be told and retold for generations to come. a reminder of the courage and sacrifice that defined the naval war in the Arctic during World War II. If this story of naval warfare and historical significance moved you, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more untold tales from the depths of history. Share this video with fellow history enthusiasts and join our community of people who are passionate about understanding the real stories behind the events that shaped our world. To watch another epic naval engagement, click the link to see when a destroyer rammed a U-boat and left the crew in the water. Thank you for joining us on this journey through history.